Good morning, church. I'm Pastor Dave, and this is the musing for July the 29th. In the book of Matthew, we find an account that has become known as the Sermon on the Mount. And in this passage, Jesus speaks about many things, but one element seems to be running through much of his message, and that is that the law of Moses doesn't go far enough, that it needs to be extended in order to be complete. Now, the law of Moses is concerned almost exclusively with behavior. Do this, don't do that. It lays out what constitutes an infraction and what is to be the penalty. It's pretty much all about what people do. Now, Jesus explains that it is equally important, if not more so, to consider what people want to do. That the sin is not just the action, but also the desire that precedes it. He points out that while the law can deal with the part of sin that is external, the internal part, the motivation, is seen and judged by God alone. Now, in contemporary criminal law, to convict a criminal, one must show three things: means, opportunity, and motive. Now, of these three, means and opportunity are provable. In fact, if they're not proven, then no conviction will result. In other words, if the suspect didn't have the means to commit the crime, or the opportunity to commit the crime, then he didn't commit the crime. Motive is different. Motive is internal and it can't be readily seen. But Jesus indicates that motivation is perhaps the key element. After all, I can have the ability and the opportunity to do a lot of bad things, but if I don't have the desire to do those things, then the means and the opportunity are irrelevant. But if the desire is there, means will be acquired. If the desire is there, opportunity will be found. The desire is the spark that turns a harmless pile of wood into a raging fire. Sin separates us from God. It builds a barrier between us and our Creator. And that barrier is built just as surely by wanting to sin as it is by committing the sin. In other words, the spiritual piece of the process is at least equal to the physical piece. And I think that's because the damage done to our relationship with God, the damage done to our spiritual health, the corrupting effects of sin, take place at the point at which we decide we want to sin, whether we go through with the action or not. Now, that's not to minimize the harm caused by the act of the sin itself. Obviously, it's better to have wanted to kill your neighbor and not done it than it is to have actually murdered your neighbor. But the damage to your soul happened when you gave in and desired to kill. We really need to heed the warnings of Christ Jesus. It's so easy to convince ourselves that as long as we don't act on our desires, we're okay. We're not. That's why the Apostle Paul urges us to take every thought captive. We need to keep our internal nature clean and pure. And when a sinful thought pops into our heads, we need to immediately squash it and reject it and expel it. Now, we can't stop the initial thought from coming. That's just part of our human brokenness. But we can learn to deal with the thought so that it doesn't hang around. Well, actually, we can't do that either. But we Christians have the power of Christ, and He can do that for us. And He will. God bless you all.